just going through and capturing questions or challenges that people are currently facing as it pertains to this topic. So whether it's, you're trying to figure out when to launch your NPS program, what does CSAT mean? How is that different than NPS? Whatever other challenges that you're working through with regard to closed loop customer feedback, let's get them out on the table. So if you just raise your hand, there's a little button in the participants panel of Zoom down, if you look at the bottom section there, that will allow you to raise your hand. And once you do, I'll call you out and ask you to come off of mute. Put your question out there. We're going to document the questions, and then we're going to go back through and we're going to talk through them. So, and by the way, if people don't raise their hand, I'm going to start calling on you. So this is an engagement kind of meeting. So just be ready for that, because it's going to happen at some point. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and get started. Kyle, you raised your hand first. So go ahead and come off mute and tell us what your question is, or your challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So my question is around customer effort score. Is anybody actually trying to gauge customer effort score apart from CSAT and NPS? And if you are doing it, are you doing it outside of onboarding in a different panel? Maybe it's, launching a new capability on your platform or something like that.
Very good. Great question. Love that. Andreas, why don't you come off mute and tell us what your question or your challenge is?
Sure. I'm interested in the experiences people had creating that closed loop between the customer and the product team. So catching any type of feedback. There are lots of tools out there and other type of mechanisms that people employ.
Okay, so specifically, how are we closing the loop with product and maybe product feedback? Okay. Great. Let's see. Jim Jones, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so full disclosure, I'm actually starting a new role on Monday. Excuse me. And if I was a betting man, this company does not have a closed loop feedback system. I get how to design this system, but I'm interested in thoughts on how to, as the new kid on the block, start to drive the culture change that is going to be needed to respond and react to it. So more the institutional side and the change management versus the process.
Awesome. Fantastic question or fantastic challenge. Great. David Ellen, why don't you come off mute?
Okay, thanks, Jay. I am interested. I've done closed loop programs before, and I'm interested in learning what lessons people have learned after they've initiated their program, and what would they have done differently if they had to do it all over again.
Great. All right, Adam, why don't you come off mute?
Yeah, thanks. Interested in how people are thinking about and executing on taking your promoters and trying to get them to write like G2 reviews and other things like that, and strategies that have worked well.
Very good. Okay, Phyllis, do you have a question or a challenge that you're facing currently in this area?
Actually, mine was related to also the NPRs and the CSATs. Just getting the customers to respond is challenging.
Getting customers to respond. Very, very good. Okay, that's great. Awesome. Let's see, anybody else before we move into sort of a discussion here? Okay. Okay, we got a couple more. Vitter, and I hope I said your name correctly. Please correct me if I was wrong.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you.
Okay, so one of the biggest challenges is adoption. So what are the different ways that you actually are trying to see how your customers, partners are adopting the products? So what KPIs, something to understand that?
Right. Okay. So maybe how we think about the operational data behind the product as factoring into the feedback of the overall experience that they're having. That's a good one. Okay, great. Alex, good to see you, man. Why don't you come off mute and tell us your challenge?
Yes. Hello. So it's slightly controversial, and you can shut me down if you want. Okay, but so I guess my question is, how do you convince folks who maybe have a more simplistic view of customer success and customer feedback that reverence to an NPS score is not customer sentiment. So not to throw NPS under the bus, but like, how do you kind of, how have people evolved the views of the organization that asking what our NPS score is not understanding our customer population, just to follow on for the people who are talking about low response rates and other challenges?
Okay, yeah. So if I could maybe reword that and you tell me if I get it wrong, how are we moving past this idea that NPS score is the be all end all, as opposed to maybe the engagement that
I'll let you speak for me in the future because you put it much more succinctly. So yes, thank you. That's why you're in the moderator chair.
Oh, I don't know about that. All right. Do we have any other questions? All right.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question if possible.
Sure, go ahead, Mariano.
So basically, I would like to know, what do you do when the feedback is not good? What do you advise to do when the score that you are getting is not good? Like you get like the higher management to call the customer. How do you try to switch the situation to a winning loop?
Love it. I think it's a very good question, and I'm sure we're going to hit that in a number of these topics as we go. Thank you, Mariano. Okay, one last chance. Let's see. Trippit, did I get that right? Tripti?
Yep, Tripti, absolutely. I think I spelled it wrong again today. My apologies.
No worries.
My question is, does product happiness index score come within the scores that we are discussing today? Or do organizations keep that as a separate happiness index score versus the overall customer happiness index score?
Customer or product happiness index score, and is it separate from customer happiness index? Did I get that right? Okay. Excellent. All right. Let's see. And Scott Hopper.
Yeah, one of the things that I was kind of wondering is if you get a lot of good feedback predominantly, is there times where you struggle to find an action to take?
Okay. Great. Okay. I bet we can find something to discuss there. That's a good one. And then Vitor, did you have one more comment?
Yes. So we've been going around trying to get, how to make a happy customer, but what is the strategy when you realize that a customer is not a right fit for you?
Okay. What if you realize you've sold outside of your ideal client profile, and how do we handle that? Okay. Very good. All right. We've got a great set of questions here. So I want to come back to the very top of this, and we'll start with Kyle's question. Customer effort score. How do we think about that maybe differently than we think about CSAT or NPS outside of onboarding? So would love for anybody who can anybody even just give us a really good example of what customer effort score is? And I realize I'm putting everybody on the spot by throwing that question out, but what is a customer effort score and how is it different than NPS or maybe even CSAT? Anybody want to take that? Christy, I'm going to call on you if nobody else will.
It's fine. I was going to jump in at some point and want to answer this or get involved with it. But yeah, no, so the way that we're thinking about a customer effort score is our customers' ability to leverage the product effectively or as designed to achieve their outcome. So for us, we're using it and deploying it through Gainsight PX, which we're using to house and manage all of our product usage data. And so we think about that as a product sentiment score. So we have a slew of different sentiment scores that we have as part of our health score matrix. And so for us, that's how we're using that. And I can happily dive into anything about the product, the process that we've got alongside of it, but that's how we're thinking about it, Jay.
Okay, very good. And Rod, you had your hand up. Why don't you come off mute and give us your thoughts on this?
My company, customer effort, was a measurement of how easy it is to use your products and services. Is it easy to engage you? Do you go to a website? Do you call a phone number? Do you have a contact center? Do you chat? How hard is it to engage you, right? Not necessarily the customer success managers, but your normal day-to-day activity. So we use that as a means of trying to understand, should we make this a little more user-friendly? And the customer success manager can many times take that feedback to people that own different contact centers or different multi-channel kind of interactions.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. So how difficult are we to do business with?
Correct.
And just real quickly, one more thing I'll add to that Kyle mentioned in his question is, are we using this outside of a certain stage of the customer journey? So we're using it outside of onboarding? Are we using it, after the sales process? Where does it fit, and how is it different? So Andreas, why don't you go ahead and come off mute?
Yeah, sure. So in addition to the proactive application that Christy described, I've been also using it kind of in the context of customer support, right? When a request was fulfilled or closed out, instead of an NPS survey, to do a CES survey, how easy was it to solve this problem for you? So in this reactive stage as well, not just the proactive, and that of course applies through all the life cycle stages of the customer.
Very good. Okay, actually, David Ellen, I know you've had you've done a lot with NPS, and you've implemented large scale programs before. So can you talk to us about your experience relative to NPS, and then also maybe how it relates to what we've heard so far with CES?
Yeah, absolutely. And NPS for me is nothing more than how somebody feels about you at a point in time. And we had a lot of clients that would rate us as a neutral, and a 7 or an 8, but be willing to give us references. We also had customers that rated us a 9 or 10, but their companies forbade them from being a reference for anybody, which is kind of interesting. So you have to really be careful with how you use that number. And I think I posted this in the chat, but effort score, how easy it is to do business with you, doesn't necessarily mean they like doing business with you. You make it easy for them to hate you sometimes, right? And you can also be hard to do business with, but your products bring so much value to their business that they really love using your products, but they just hate talking to your people. So you have to use some of these metrics in combination with each other.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Let's see, Rod, you had your hand up. Did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, at my company, we had levels of NPS. So we had an NPS survey that we would do that's transactional or event-based. How was the event that you just had with support? And then a relationship survey that was actually done by the CSM. And that was typically to the people that actually purchase a scope of work or purchase the product. So the people that are the key stakeholders in renewing, we had a survey for them. And we also had an event-based survey for the end user.
Very good. Okay. And Andreas, did you have something else to add to this as well?
Yes, I put a link to a Harvard Business Review article in there on customer effort score. Stop trying to delight your customers. So if someone's interested.
Very good. Okay, that's great. And I see it right there. Dave Jackson, why don't you come off mute and share your thoughts?
Yeah, just a couple of points on the things that have been made. And I have a bit of history with this because I founded a survey company many years ago. Be careful about taking what the standard methodology says. So one of our customers were one of the big UK banks, one of the big 4 UK banks. And they looked at the NPS scores in great detail. And they actually found that their promoters were quite often 7s and 8s, not just 9s and 10s. And equally, people that gave them 7s were people that went on and cancelled. And if you read Reichard's original article, he says, we bucketed in this way because that's where the majority was. But it may be very different for your company. So I think we've got to be very careful about taking a methodology and just applying it. There's a great saying, not everybody might like it, but it's, the saying is, the difference between a methodologist and a terrorist is you can negotiate with a terrorist.
Very good. I like that a lot, Dave. Phyllis, why don't you come off mute and share your thoughts?
So one of the issues that we had the company was trying to not overload the customer with surveys, right? Different surveys, whether, you know, the product team sent something out, support sent something out, we sent something out from customer success. And what they decided to do is develop their own survey inside of Salesforce, which even made it worse. Because you weren't getting the true perspective of what, at least for my benefit, for customer success and what they were doing, because they would check boxes, yeah, this is okay, but I'm having these issues with the product. And, you know, there was a lot of that happened because they didn't want to bombard the customer with a lot of surveys, you know, like we get surveys from, you know, if we have a Dell laptop, we got Microsoft products, you get all those, and how many do you actually answer or respond to? So that was a challenge too, as to how to really divide those and get some very good feedback. Just wanted to add a comment.
That's a really good point. So I think there's a question later in here too, and we'll go ahead and move sort of to that. But and I think it might have actually been yours. But how do you maximize engagement with those feedback mechanisms? Is anybody doing using a technique that they can share that to get more people involved in that process? Because what Phil has said is so true. Like, our response rates seem to be very low to these things. So who has ideas to share about maximizing the response rates? Gretchen, why don't you come off mute and share?
I mean, we never perfected it, and we didn't have it systemized because we didn't have any money for systems, but we gamified it. And I was in the advertising industry, which tends to be a very young first job sort of place to work. And so the gamification worked, and we did it with everything from, you know, they filled out surveys, they sat with product and did walkthroughs with us, they completed their training, they logged in, like we kind of did everything. And then we started with really little tchotchkes and stuff, but then we escalated it to the point where we ended up doing a big custom, actually allowed the people who had the most points to come up and present with us. And a lot of them were really junior, so it was a really great opportunity for them to get in front of some of their agency leadership and show that they were participating and smart and all of that. So that was the way that we got the most success. I mean, I think the gamification thing works for certain types of people. Doesn't work for everybody. I'm looking at Christy. I don't know if it would work for her business, but for advertising agencies, it was great.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. Like, include some kind of benefit in there. Ed Powers, why don't you come off mute?
Yeah, I mean, Steve Bernstein is probably a better person to talk about this, but he helped us at IntelliSecure. What we did on that was to boost response rates is we would not do a survey. We would do a questionnaire prior to what we call semi-annual business review. So what we would do is we would go to the champion and say, who besides yourself will be participating, go through the list, get the names, and then we would do something that Steve calls active recruiting. So we asked that champion to go to those people, say, in preparation for our review, please take 3 minutes to fill this out. And it wasn't just an NPS score, it was some specific things about the relationship. And from that, we were able to get response rates up in the high 60s, close to 70%. And then we use that data is in preparation for the semi-annual business review, and then would have takeaways from that. So you act on the data as you collect it. So for enterprise accounts, that may be a suggestion for you.
That's so good. And Steve Bernstein is the authority on this. We've learned so much from him just by listening to him talk about recruiting. You have to treat these things like a campaign, it seems. Jeremy Donaldson, why don't you come off and share your thoughts?
Yeah, Ed, I actually really like that feedback because we did something similar at my last company, and I'm actually working on carrying some of that over here. But to add on top of that, what we did is in leading up to, we actually had a rolling 12 months of knowing, like for an NPS survey, for example, we would know in advance, all of our CSMs would know in advance, 12 months in advance, when those surveys were going to go out for those customers. And so if they, and every month if they're had a monthly meeting or whenever the frequency for that customer is, it was on the CSM ownership to be able to touch base with that customer, say, hey, you're going to be getting this customer survey here on this date. It's going to be sent out at this time. It's going to come from this email address. Here are the texts from your organization that are going to get this. We ask that you make sure that it's whitelisted. So we would walk through it, take about 5 minutes to walk through all of this. They would validate that they had the right contacts. We would validate that it was whitelisted, basically get them bought into and acknowledge that they were going to be getting that. So that was kind of step one. We would follow up with them the day before the survey would go out to say, hey, as a reminder, this is going to be coming out to you. The survey would go out later that week. If they didn't respond to the survey, we would follow up. And then on the following month's call, we would touch base with them and either thank them for the survey if they completed it, or if they didn't, we would touch base with them again and say, hey, want to make sure that you got it. And at my previous company, we were actually in the mid 70s. In my particular territory, we were pushing almost 80% response rate from our accounts. And currently with that practice, I'm in the 50s to 55% response rate. So it's just about getting into a consistent cadence and making your customers aware that it's important and it matters and why it matters to them to complete it, right? It's not important. It's not just about us as a company sending it out, but putting the ownership on them and saying, this is why it's important for you to complete this. And this is why it's valuable for you to do this, and turning the conversation onto them as opposed to making it about your business is really what it came down to. And then just having that follow-up mechanism in place is what's really worked for us and what's worked really well.
That is really awesome, Jeremy. And I think it's such a key point. It's not about us, right? We have to make it about them. And so closing that loop is really going to be important in this kind of process. So that's a good segue into Jim Jones' question. And he asked, how do you drive the culture change needed to make sure that we are always providing a response? So whether it's broadly, providing feedback to the entire customer base, or whether it's, one by one negative, feedback, like how do we garner the resource and the will to go put in that effort that it takes, because that's actually what it takes. So has anybody recently gone through this kind of cultural change within an organization that could share the way that they've sort of tackled that and had to go about implementing that? I'm gonna call who was that? Does somebody want to speak? Oh, hey, go ahead, Ed. Sorry.
Yeah, we did it in conjunction with, we did executive sponsorship. So we tiered our accounts into 3 buckets. We had what we called strategic, we had growth, and then valued. So strategic were the monster accounts that we were protecting and co-developing value with. The growth accounts were ones where we saw lots of white space, we got in, want to land and expand. And then the valued were ones that were ad hoc, right? We didn't think there was a whole lot of opportunity, but we'd work with them. So what we did is we stratified our whole executive management team to own our strategic and growth accounts. So that was part of their responsibility, is when this feedback came up, they were responsible to follow up, especially if it was an economic decision maker that came back with some negative feedback.
Very good. I love that. Let's see, Courtney Greeley, I'm going to call on you. How have you dealt with this sort of change and closing the loop kind of process?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. Every week I usually have, something that I've already worked through, but this is something that's still, I think, pretty challenging. Especially we've had a lot of changes in terms of our product team and leadership there, so once we've gotten something started, it kind of trips up and someone else comes in the organization and kind of changes it. So this is actually one of the weeks where I don't have a whole lot to say or share, but I'm really listening and taking a lot of notes because this is a really valuable session about how to close that loop. So yeah, you got me on a week where I am all ears.
All right, very good. Sherry, I'm going to call on you. Sherry Srebnick.
I knew that was coming. Nils did it. Nils was laughing because he did it to me last week.
Yeah, how have you dealt with this?
This is a great question and a very relevant topic because there's lots of things that I'm trying to restructure for our own team and for the team here in the US and then hopefully globally. And we've done NPS in the past, and I'm not going to rehash all of that, but I agree with 90% of the comments about it. I don't particularly care for NPS because I don't think that their follow-up from it is always the way it should be, and people get really stuck on it. We got a 9. What does that mean? In any case, I'm looking right now, one thing that I want to get better at, again, yes, I'm having the same issue with responses. People have email fatigue. How do we get them where they are? I'm trying to implement the best way to do a CSAT post onboarding. So any feedback about that, or anyone that's done a post onboarding CSAT, like, I know that we can all ask the same type of questions, but has anybody had any really questions that really got more feedback than others? And how did you use that feedback to improve your own onboarding process, or where it related back to your product, give that feedback to the product team and actually try to get some traction from it?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Effie, I'm going to go ahead and call on you, and then I want to come back to the question you just asked in a minute, Sherry.
So one of the things that I implemented recently, and I have to say it wasn't my idea. I'm like 99.9% sure it was on the Gain Grow GGR, what I call, board, and I don't remember who it is. So if you're here, thanks. But instead of how likely are you to recommend your X to a colleague, it was how likely are you to find value in our product in the next 6 months? And that is such an awesome question. And I also think because it's sort of a little bit different, we saw an increase in responses. Another thing that I did in order, and also, like, for the record, I hate NPSs, but it's sort of this something that, like we've mentioned, management expects it. It's sort of like this common thing that you need. And for those who have heard me speak in the past, I'm in the security space, and we don't have telemetry. Not many of our customers can share a lot, so we sort of like lean on it more than average. Another thing that I'm doing, I'm actually going to be sending one out in a couple of weeks, is really utilize the post filling out part. So if someone fills out a negative response, we segmented it into the CSMs and are sticking their Calendly link in it. So if they do have a negative response, they could automatically set up a meeting with their CSM. I haven't done that yet, and I hope to see very positive results with it. And of course, if it's a positive result, and I also consider 8s not neutral in my opinion, like 8 to 10, and it's positive, I'm going to put in my Calendly because I manage the team, and hopefully they could set up a meeting and we could get some sort of positive references or something from that. So that's the way I'm taking this horrible NPS and trying to make it a little bit better and get some valuable use out of it.
That's great, Effie. And Mariano, I think that sort of goes to the question that you had asked as well, is like, what do you do when you get bad scores? And
yeah,
I think especially...
But maybe the problem is with the CSM, for example. So to set up a meeting with the CSM, maybe we need to do something more. Which other things do you guys do?
If I could just answer that one more time,
sure.
just
Go ahead,
really quickly. I happen to say I love negative responses, because negative responses are a million times better than a no response. It shows that your customer is still engaged and they're sort of reaching out for help. And you could also piggyback on that. And many times us as CSMs, we see some patterns in our customers, and we could go to products and we could go to marketing and say, you know what, I see XYZ. But if we have a customer that's complaining about something, that gives us so much more ammunition. So those negative responses to me are gold. And we could always see if there's any, like, if you have a few customers in certain segments or certain whatevers that are saying, are commenting on the same thing, go ahead and pull product in, go ahead and pull R&D or whoever you need, and use these negative responses to your advantage.
Yeah, that is so good. And I'm sure Steve Bernstein's ears are burning this morning, but he's got data from his years and years of doing this that says a non-responder is anywhere from 3 to 14 times more likely to cancel than somebody who is a detractor, right? A detractor is a call for help. And to Effie's point, I love it. Some of those can become your biggest advocates because you engage with them. It's a call for engagement. And I'll give you my 2 cents on all of this, is that it doesn't really matter what methodology you use. It matters how well you're following up and closing the loop on what you're learning, right? And those comments are gold, the ratings are gold, and if we lose that opportunity, or if we miss that opportunity, we've missed a huge opportunity to engage. Okay, cool. So Nuon, why don't you come off mute and give us your thoughts?
Yeah,
and I hope I said your
thanks,
name right.
Jay. Yeah, you did. Can you hear me okay?
Awesome. I can hear you great.
Yeah, I was just adding on to what Effie said, and also going back to something Alex asked about. I think one of the things that I found most useful was that looking at a process end to end. We talked about the process for following up with the customer and making sure the response rates were right. But one of the things I've seen in the past work really well is to have this overall executive approach to, we're doing this survey, here's what we expect, and here's what the planned follow-up is. So that'll contain components of CSMs following up with individuals, the executive sponsors getting involved when needed. And echoing what the group has said, I think it was very much about the specific feedback we were getting and not so much the scores. We actually did this thing where we'd have these executive reviews involving CS, customer support, product, sales, the whole team as it were, and we would break out the components of feedback we got. So we would say, if this is feedback regarded to support, then there is an approach we would use and a team of people that would respond to that. If it was something to do with product, that would be a product heavy response. So summarizing, I think, quite apart from just getting the feedback and the scores, what helped a lot was having this sort of company-wide process going, here's what we're doing, here's who we expect to have involved, and here's how we'll follow up. And to Alex's question, that's what I think turned it for us from going, what's our score, how are we doing, to going, what's the value of this survey and how are we responding?
I love what you just said. That was awesome. And I think that really goes back to Jim's point in his question as well, which is, how do we change the hearts and minds? You really have to do it at the executive level, right? We're going to be thinking about this differently. So that's a great way to do it. Ben Elserode, we haven't heard from you today. Why don't you come off mute and give us your thoughts on this? Are you there, Ben? Did I put you on the spot too much?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Awesome.
I don't have a camera today, but
no worries.
Like a trip to Best Buy to get a new one is in order. So just to be transparent, I'm in transition at the moment. So I'll speak to what we did previously. And I agree with the points that have been made about follow-ups. Your survey is only as good as your follow-up. And so there's been some comments in the chat as well as mentioned here. But if you don't intend to follow up, then don't even send the survey if you're trying to build relationships. Now, if you have a massive audience of 100,000 users, you're not going to be able to follow up. And this is a different objective. But if we're talking about enterprise users here, very valuable accounts. And if you don't intend to follow up, then I would say don't send it at all. And I think there are two that we emphasize, two means of follow up. One is an individual response. So depending on the score, you're going to have different people potentially responding depending on the feedback. Now, if this is a real critical account, you might bring your product folks in to hear a little bit more in depth, to let the respondent know we're curious. We want to know we hear you. So there's an individual response. I think that a CSM or an implementation lead would know best how to facilitate. The second would be what did we do? So maybe you responded, maybe you didn't, but I bet you'll respond next time if you see the actions we took this time. So I think that's a way to engage folks that got your survey and skipped over it, got your survey and said, I'm not wasting my time. Got your survey and said, oops, I never did respond to that. If you show them the actions and the results at multiple levels of your company, I think that's how you pull in the silent crowd sitting on the sidelines. So some of the things that we did, and I think emphasized that we're not doing this as an exercise because we check a box. We do this because we're truly looking to hear and as a result, make a change.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Jim, why don't you come off mute and share? Hopefully this has given you some thoughts.
Yeah, it has. And I just want to say, +1 to what Ben said. John said this in the chat, and I said this in the chat too. I think the feedback that you get, whatever the response rate is, it's the qualitative stuff that makes a difference, that you can go in front of executives and say, here's what they're saying, which is part of the change management. And we did our first NPS survey and the response rate was like 5%, but we sent a letter out to everybody that got the invite and said, we heard you, here's what we're doing. And man, the next iteration, our response rate just skyrocketed. And actually, Rich, I'll have to dig it up and I can send it or post it in the community later. But Richard Branson did a great article about kind of the Virgin way of doing their feedback response. And he's got a great letter out to customers of what they do and all that. So Ben, you make some really great points. And I just wanted to say, +100, and I'm learning a lot on this already.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Sama, why don't you come off mute and give us your thoughts?
Thank you. So I think NPS data, particularly if in the early customer life cycle, you can, if you follow up on the quantitative aspect, can be a great leading indicator for either risk and or expansion or upsell. And so building some sort of process workflow into Gainsight or Salesforce that allows the right individuals at your company to follow up with those stakeholders, I think can be invaluable. And that's something that we've seen work really well.
I like that a lot. Like, make it part of a process that is happening systematically so you can tell if you're following up or not. That's fantastic. Brian LaFall, why don't you come? Good to see you, man. Why don't you come off mute?
Yeah, you as well, Jay. I'm curious if others are doing this, but we just started doing something kind of unique in our NPS responses, and that is taking all the responses that we're getting from a single customer, wrapping it up into a dashboard that we're then presenting back to stakeholders at the company, and that's part of the QBR process. So on a quarterly basis, we're wrapping up a broader story and narrative that is using words directly from their users and demonstrating the value that a customer is or a user of our customer is really seeing with our product. And by kind of marrying that with some of the usage and adoption trends, we're able to say, hey, did you know your users are using in the marketing department, generating these types of insights? And oh, by the way, this is their experience with using Looker. And it's been really valuable to spark interesting conversations at the executive level so that they can see where there's opportunity to improve the experience all across the board. And it kind of helps build the future project plan. But then we also can see, hey, and here's some of the positives. Some people love this feature or they really don't. So we started doing that recently. I'm wondering if others have done that as well.
It's a great question, and I'd be curious, are people showing both the good and the bad feedback? Because maybe you can deputize the customer to help you go tackle that negative feedback, because maybe it's a perception issue or a change issue. Let's see, Christian Sletton, I haven't heard from you. What thoughts do you have on Brian's question or experience do you want to share?
Yeah, thanks for calling me. I actually don't have anything to add on this, but to kind of add a question, I was curious because I hear a lot of not being a big fan of NPS, which I also am as well. I'd love to hear anecdotally some really big wins people are getting out of NPS as well. And I would also quickly add, one thing we did to really up our response rate was to actually work with our product team and build it into product. But apologies, I don't have a specific response.
No,
to that.
that's great, and I did see a comment about that as well. About and I think it was Rick Adams that said we need to build this into our product to really maximize response rate. But anybody have thoughts on that they'd like to share about sort of big wins that you've gotten from implementing this? And I think it goes to the question that that David Ellen asked, which is, after you've implemented this, what have you learned? Alex, why don't you go ahead and speak?
Yeah, just briefly there. So, I mean, again, it's not the MPS bashing session, but I kind of tend to think it's not that useful, especially for a high touch engagement where you may be able to ask your 100 customers directly instead of send them a survey that 20% respond to. Off my high horse now, one of the big benefits is it's a great way to close customers to advocacy. So there was a comment about how you kind of turn 8s, 9s, and 10s into advocates. Well, that's a big metric we track is what percentage of our customers are willing to reference, because it kind of shows something more, they're willing to do something extra for us. So we, in the survey, will ask them if they give us an 8, 9, or a 10. I think I've said this on a previous call, but we'll ask them in the survey if they'd be willing to do referencing. So it makes, when the CS leader or the CSM calls them up, it's not a foreign question that we're asking them that they can get weird about. They've already indicated an interest, and essentially it's up to us now to close the warm lead to increase our reference pool and obviously, hopefully, increase our growth and new customer acquisition. So that's one of the wins to answer that question.
Yeah, I love it. Zeev Pellet, I'm going to call on you. I know you have some strong thoughts on this.
Yeah, definitely. I like that NPS bashing hour. Yeah, I'm still trying to find the real solution for really understanding customers. And I think that, I spoke a few times about my relationship initiative. I think that's when we speak B2B SaaS, high touch, what we call tier 1, tier 2 customers. I really want for the CSM to really know what is the status, without us asking. So they should have a very good relationship and understanding. I definitely connect with lots of the things that said there. I need a follow-up with Ed Powers about the executive sponsorship, and Shari, we are now implementing onboarding 2.0, and one big win there will be a CSAT after that. So we are going to implement something that is like a QBR, but it's going to be I don't remember how they call it, but it's going to be like an onboarding business review, so the end of the onboarding. And then a CSAT with someone, a director level for that team, is going to connect with someone in the customer to speak with them. So it's 100% response rate. I don't want 60%. And I don't want one person that will answer a survey and one not. I want to speak with someone that is very high level, that they will give us the real, in the end, when you think about that, so after the onboarding, I want to know how they feel about us. Not if it's not the Boolean, yeah, it's onboarded or not. I want to know how they feel about the apps flyer after the onboarding.
Very good. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. Okay, great. And by the way, there's a great conversation that took place, I think about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, with Alejandro on the Gain, Grow, Retain community about he outlined his whole executive sponsored program in very detailed fashion. So I'd encourage everybody to go take a look at that. We have only a couple of minutes left here. So I think we've hit most of the questions that we had to talk about in one form or the other. But does anybody are there any closing thoughts, any kind of things that you feel like you've had on your mind that haven't been said in this discussion that you'd like to throw out? Heather Cottle, I know you're always good for some thoughts. So why don't you give us a parting thought from your point of view?
Yeah, thank you. I think you were reading my mind because I was debating on throwing this out there. I think we still struggle, and Anna Alley, my counterpart, is on as well, with building allies within the company. So this is back to the the culture piece. So I'm actually going to go to the community as well and look at that, because we've done listening lounges with developers and customers. I'm definitely going to research the sponsorship, exec sponsorship. We've started doing some engagement with other executives, but telling customer stories in company meetings, having an internal VOC, but I think we've struggled a bit to build more allies in the spirit of closing the loop with actual positive outcomes for customers when it's outside of the space that I control. So I have so many notes. I love each and every one of you for sharing your point of view, because I am learning a ton. This is awesome.
Awesome. Great. That nice way to sum it up. Okay, cool. Jeff's yanking us back in. So it's good chat. Good chatting with all of you guys today. And we'll take the
a lot of people back in now. Sherry, good to see you. Alex Farmer, how are you? Anna Alley, good to see you. I'm always jealous of your wall ornament there. I think